Even with 2 minutes on the clock, I knew that I had to be very precise, and I needed to find a way to continue my attack. Welcome back to Road to Rapid Top 1000, the series in which I play rapid games, typically with the time control 15 minutes 10 seconds increment, in the hopes of reaching the top 1000 leaderboard on chess.com. And in this game, I came up against one of the strongest opponents that I faced yet in this series. His rapid rating was well over 2,000, but his blitz rating is actually about 2,400, which makes him the second highest rated player that I've played against on the series. By blitz standards, I actually played against a 2,500 rated blitz player way back on episode 3. You can check that out. And I knew this obviously was going to be a tough game, especially since his username ends in 007, which may make him the Indian James Bond. But anyway, I opened with c4, which is typically my approach against stronger players. I like to play something solid. And he played knight f6, and we have a typical English with knight c3, but he now goes for fianchetto with g6, and I played g3, looking to fianchetto myself. And here he already played somewhat of a strange move, knight to c6, which is not so good because typically you want to allow this pawn some freedom. Something like c5 is good here, maybe d6, d5, e5. A lot of pawn moves are good here. Knight c6, not so good because now after bishop g2, bishop g7, I play d4, and I'm just a moment away from attacking the knight. And so here he played d6, I played knight f3, and he played bishop d7. And now I castled. And this is kind of starting to look like the reverse of the game that I featured in the last episode. Sort of like a English turned King's Indian. And here the move that I was expecting was e5, which is the move that I would play here. But he instead played the move knight a5, which looks odd and is, again, not the best move because it is attacking the pawn, but it can easily be defended. And what is the knight going to be doing on a5? So I simply defended with queen d3, and he castled. And at this point, I spent a few minutes because I was deciding, should I really try to punish him for putting the knight in such a bad position? Should I play b4? And it turns out b4 is actually quite a good move here. But after knight c6, b5, he can just return to a5, and I felt like I wasn't really gaining a whole lot by doing this. So I instead decided to just solidify in the center by playing e4. If he's going to move his knight away, I guess I'll just expand. And here he played bishop g4, moving his bishop a second time, but he's now attacking the knight. And if he's able to take it, it might free the possibility of him playing e5. And here, even though my position is pretty good, I got a little bit stuck. I wasn't sure how to continue. Actually, a good move here would have been to play knight to d2, just prevent him from taking. And then if he plays something like e5, I can then close the position with d5 and then maybe scare the bishop away, and I'm doing quite well. But instead I just went for bishop e3, which looks like a very nice developing move, but it kind of allows him some opportunities, and here he played the move c5. And it looks at first glance like it hangs a pawn because I have two attackers, but if I take and pawn takes, now if there's a queen trade and I take, he then regains a pawn here. And if I take the pawn on e7, his rook can then infiltrate, and it starts to become quite uncomfortable for me. So I knew I didn't want to go into this. Instead, I just played d5, closing the position. And here he played a tricky maneuver move, knight to d7. The idea is he wants to take this knight and then plant his knight on e5. So, like, for example, if I try to attack his bishop, he'll gladly take and then play this move and fork my queen and bishop, attack this pawn on c4. So in response, I played the move knight to t2. But this is actually a mistake. The move that I should have played was bishop f4, and this is actually the only move I have here that kind of retains my advantage. Now if he takes and plays knight e5, I can simply take his bishop, and after bishop takes, we have a roughly equal position in which I'm a little bit better because I have more space, and again, his knight is kind of idling on a5. But I thought that I'd be just fine moving my knight back to d2. I'm eliminating the target from the bishop, and I'm reinforcing against c4. But now knight e5 is played, and it quickly becomes apparent that I made a mistake, because he now has both his knights aiming at c4. And the only way my queen can continue to defend this pawn is by moving to e2, but it can't because the bishop guards that square. So I have to play queen to c2, and now he simply takes. And after I take, he takes, and he's simply up a clean pawn. So at this point, I was a little bit rattled. I'm playing against a strong player, and I got off to a good start, only to mess up, and now I'm down a pawn, and my position is looking a little bit shaky. But what can I do? I have to continue, and I played bishop f4. Obviously, I don't want to allow him to take with his knight. And he played queen to b6, jumping in and trying to attack this pawn here. So I played rook to b1 to defend, and he plays e5. Aggressive, expanding in the center, and I actually retreated all the way back to c1. Taking en passant here was also possible, but I felt like this would give him a lot of activity. His rook is open, he might expand in the center at some point. I felt like my only chance was to keep the position closed and create some kind of attack at some point. So I played bishop to c1, and he played queen to a5. I played b3, just trying to scare his knight away, and so he retreated to b6. And now again, I have to continue to create some kind of threats. So I played the move f3, and so he goes back. And now I played the move bishop b2, which might not have been the best move, but I was feeling like I could contest this diagonal at some point. I might want to play f4, and then if I can trade off the bishops, it would be good for me because I would be eliminating a strong defender around his king. So here he played a nice move c4, which kind of expands, opens up the possibility of his queen coming in to attack the king. And I was already quite unsure of how to continue. If I take the pawn, he'll just take with the knight, and my bishop's hit. If I make some kind of rook move, he'll just give me a check. So I decided to just play king to h1, kind of a prophylactic move. Now, if he ever plays queen to c1, at least it's not with check. Sometimes it kind of helps to just wait out and see what your opponent wants to do. And so here he played the move rook a to c8, now putting his rook on a very promising file, starting to put pressure against my queen. And here I now played queen to c1, which is kind of a double-purpose move. It's now assuming this diagonal, looking to potentially go to the king side, but at the same time, I might be able to play bishop a3 and target this weak pawn on d6. So by playing this move, I actually dipped under 4 minutes on the clock, and my opponent had 8 minutes. So he had a lot of time to think, but here he played a move very quickly, which turned out to be kind of the turning point in the game. He played bishop f6. And his idea is, once I play bishop a3 to attack this pawn, he can just come back and defend it, and he's keeping everything safe. But there's a little bit of a trick that I found here, and I play the move b4. The idea is, if he takes, now I play bishop a3, I have a double attack against his queen, and once the queen moves, I'm able to take on d6. And I want a pawn back, attacking his rook, and I have this pass pawn. So he obviously didn't take, he instead retreated with queen to a6. And I now played bishop to a3 anyway, now I'm preparing b5, and again, to try to target this d6 pawn. The only weakness I see as of right now is his pawn, so that's what I'm aiming for. And here he could have just very simply rejected my plan by playing bishop b5, making it impossible for me to push my pawn. Instead, he played knight to a8, which looks kind of weird, but he's just kind of freeing up some space for his queen to come back, and maybe he might even be able to remaneuver the knight. But the problem is it's too slow for him. I played b5 now, I'm attacking his queen. He goes to b6, and now I thought for another minute or so and played the move f4. I got to get the forces moving. I'm starting to get very low on the clock, and if I don't get some kind of attack going, surely I'm going to lose this game. And so here he played queen to c7, getting his queen sort of to safety, now preparing to move the knight to b6, and I continued with queen to e3, just attacking this pawn over here. And he now decided to take on f4, sort of baiting me into making a mistake, because out of the 3 possible recaptures that I have, only 1 is correct. And so here I played g takes f4. Notice that if I take with the queen, the knight is no longer defended and he can just grab it. And if I take with the rook, then he has this pin that he can create against my rook, and he's winning in exchange. So I took with the pawn, and now he decided to make another queen move. Queen to a5, attacking the bishop and attacking the knight, but clearly he didn't think long enough about this move because I have a very simple response, bishop to b4, which gets the bishop out of the way and also defends the knight. sending his queen back. He offers a trade. And what do you think? Am I going to trade queens? Of course not. You never want to trade queens when you're down material and you have a possibility to make an attack. So I played queen to g3, and he now played rook f to e8. And now I'm down to 2 minutes, and he has a whole 5, so I have to be aggressive. I have to get things going. So I played a4. He returned his bishop to g7, looking to play f5 at some point. I played a5, attacking his queen again, and he sent his queen into d4, looking to maybe trade queens by playing queen d3, but I'm not allowing this. I played rook a to d1. And so he played queen to f6, just returning into safety. It's actually the only safe square for the queen. And now his plan was to just get the knight into the game, solidify, and try to trade pieces into an endgame in which he's going to be a pawn up. But here, even with 2 minutes on the clock, I knew that I had to be very precise, and I needed to find a way to continue my attack. And here I found, dare I say, a brilliant move. e5. This move looks just counterintuitive because I'm putting the pawn right into danger. The pawn can take, and after that the queen can take, the rook can take. Seemingly everyone is watching the e5 square, and so he takes the pawn. But the whole point behind this was to free the e4 square for the knight to jump in, which hits the queen, and also threatens to jump into d6 from where it'll fork black's rooks. And so my opponent didn't have much of a choice. He played queen to f5, just getting his queen out of danger, but now knight d6, and I made a triple fork, attacking his queen and his 2 rooks. And here he decided to take the pawn. Now if I take his queen, he'll take my queen, but I can just take with the rook. And now he played queen to c2, attacking my rook, and I moved it to f1. I'm being very careful to dodge his attempts at counterplay, plus his rooks aren't going anywhere. I'm going to get one or the other. And so seeing as how f7 was under attack, he played f5, and now I had a choice of which rook to take, and after thinking for a little bit, I decided to take the rook on c8. And now he recaptured. And now if we evaluate the position, I won an exchange, meaning I'm up a rook in exchange for a knight, but if we count the pawns, I have 4, and he has an entire 6. So by no means am I winning materially. But if we look at the position, his king does have the hint of vulnerability about it, and so I knew, again, that I needed to attack, because if I just make slow moves, he'll activate his knight and his bishop, and he'll start to push the pawn, and I could be in a lot of trouble. And I actually had only a minute and a half on the clock here, and I needed to find a precise way to continue my attack. And so after thinking for a bit, I decided on queen to g5. It's not the best move in the position, but it'll do. And the idea is I'm looking to get into g5 and attack his bishops, and more importantly, put pressure on g7, which is really the only defender he has close to his king. And so here he just proceeded to pick up another pawn. And I now play d6, which activates my light square bishop, and also, if I'm able to sneak this pawn past him, I might be able to make a queen. And so here he played rook to b8, just guarding b7. And again, how do I continue? I had only 40 seconds on the clock, but I continued to attack by playing bishop c5, hitting this pawn on a7, but also this bishop might be bound in a different direction. And he played b6, and now I didn't even bother taking this pawn, I simply played bishop d4. Now opposing his dark square bishop, which is again his only defender around the king. And so here he really should have been aware of the danger and gone sort of into defensive mode, but he simply continued to attack by playing c3, which opened up an attack against my rook. But I knew I didn't even have to worry about this. So I took on g7. And now he played the move bishop takes f1, and it looks like I lost a rook, but as soon as this happened, I knew I had this game in the bag because, believe it or not, I have a forced checkmate in 3 here. Pause and see if you can find it. And so the checkmate starts with bishop to d5 check, which as soon as I play this, my adrenaline spiked through the roof as I knew I had this game in the bag. Only move for him is to take the bishop, and now I follow up with queen to e7 check. And now he has 2 squares with the king, h8 and h6. But either way, he's getting mated. If he goes to h8, queen f6 is checkmate. Notice how the queen and the bishop combine. Instead, he played the move king to h6. Now I was able to finish the game with a stylish rook to h4 checkmate. Notice how all 3 of my pieces were active in the creation of this checkmate, while his pathetic rook and knight in the corner and his queen and bishop, which were so close yet so far from causing me any problems. I think that was a pretty well played game on my part. Of course, I had to overcome an early hiccup when I lost that pawn, but I think I fought back well and was able to make some very precise moves under time pressure. I played the last 10 or so moves of that game under 2 minutes, which, even with increment, is tough. When you're playing against a really strong player, you have to find the most correct moves, otherwise you're going to get punished. And as far as my overall progress on the leaderboards, not much of an improvement overall this week. I actually was able to reach a peak of 1971, which is my highest rapid rating to date. And at that point, I was actually in the top 2,500. But since then, I've lost a few games and dropped out, meaning my rating is currently around 1940. But I'm still well in the top 3,000, and I feel like I have some momentum on my side, and I'm just going to keep on grinding.